our dear friends over at Fintech Business Weekly got their hands on the recent Pipe financial documents. And they showed that in calendar 24, what they also call their fiscal year 24, Pipe only had $7.1 million in revenue. Now, let's not make fun of revenue. Revenue is revenue. But for a company that had a $2 billion valuation, Jason, I think a $7 million result for a year is pretty low. Let's take a look at the first document and talk about a couple of important things. So the text here I know is a little bit small. It's a board slide. Roll with me. What we see here on the top line is essentially revenue growth per quarter. So in the first quarter of 2024, they had $600K in revenue, 1.2 million in Q2, 2.2 million in Q3, and then 3.1 million in Q4. The problem with that last number is that they had forecast 3.7, so it was a pretty serious miss from their numbers. Also, their cash expenses were quite high, and their cash balance was trending down. So all that said, Jason, two things here. One, tiny company, clearly in the middle of a reset and a pivot. But on the other hand, relatively impressive 2024 revenue growth, I think.
Okay. The reason this is controversial and the reason this document leaked is because clearly somebody is upset. So I said to the person, like, how did you get this document? Like, how did you get board documents? How did you get the financials? And he said, oh, I did journalism. And I said, yeah, but somebody leaked it, right? Like, you should say how you, in some way, got this information and verified it's true. Let's put that aside, in the journalism, controversies over leaked documents. I don't assume they asked somebody to leak it because that would be potentially legally actionable. Yeah, that would be highly unethical. But they could have had somebody who was upset and they said, oh, I'd love to know more. And then that person sent them a screenshot. Now, that person is breaking trust. I think a board member, former board member, investor, somebody who was associated with the company leaked this because they're upset at the founders. The founders who left the company or became board directors had done a big secondary. At the time, it was super controversial for a company raising at this ridiculous valuation. And it was a ridiculous valuation. Everybody knew it. And I remember, I think Saks maybe did the Series A. A lot of my friends were investors in it. It was a great idea. It was an idea at the time that was awesome for potentially our founders. So this is peak ZERP. You've got SaaS companies with predictable revenue. You could go in. We talked earlier about investors being able to place bets on startups. Here was a way to loan money to a startup. Let's say it was Slack, doing incredible, growing when it was a private company. They're growing. Instead of raising another round of financing, they know they have 10 million in revenue. Next year, they're going to do 30. They say, hey, give us 10 million now. We'll deploy that, and we're willing to sell that 10 million in future revenue for 90 cents on the dollar, 94 cents on the dollar. So give us $9 million now. And then when we get the 10 million next year, we'll give you the 10 million. You'll make, this 10, 11, 12% gain. And it's like doing corporate paper and loans for SaaS startups. Now, what's the problem with this business? If those SaaS companies stop growing, which we had massive headwinds, and they did, it was like the space was just too populated and AI came in. And the idea of every one of your flagship customers going to grow their base of employees by 10% turned into they're going to lay off 10%.
Right.
So what happened to the Stripes of the world were, okay, we have a 1,000-person company paying us $15 a month per employee. It's a $180,000 contract. That contract will be worth $250 in 2 years or $350. And we're going to sell them on these new features and products. And then that company comes back and says, hey, we want a discount. We're thinking of using an open source product. And we went from 1,000 employees down to 600. Yeah. So we need to get 75% off. Well, if you gave them a loan against that revenue, that's problematic. So there were multiple reasons why this startup had challenges. But if you're taking money off the table and you allow secondary sales, and then the founders move out of the management positions and they're not going to grind, they're going to go spend the money and on their lifestyle, this left a very bad taste in people's mouths, according to my recollection. Now, I'm not saying anybody did anything nefarious. These are all adults who sold shares and bought shares in the secondary market, and no crying in the casino. The founders made a better trade than the investors who bought the shares for them. Yes, in some cases, the founders make a terrible trade. Sometimes you'll have founders of a company sell shares early in YouTube or Instagram or Uber or DoorDash, and they leave the last 10x or 100x on the table, and they should have just not bought in their second house or their first house. They should have just, not diversified or sold their position. So anyway, it does make one wonder what's going on here.
I meet with a lot of companies, and I'm telling you, every founder I know is asking themselves the same question. How do I get more out of AI? We all know these tools are making people more productive, they're making people more efficient, but a lot of founders still have reasonable concerns about data security or just finding the right application for their way of doing business. But waiting on the sidelines is no longer an option, so I recommend founders use NetSuite by Oracle and put AI to work for your company. NetSuite is the #1 AI cloud ERP, and it's trusted by over 43,000 businesses. They're going to give you a unified suite of products, all safely sharing interconnected data. And that's going to help you automate routine tasks, dive into your analytics for clear, actionable insights, all while keeping your costs low and making your team faster. Right now, get the free business guide, Demystifying AI, at netsuite.com/twist. The guide is free to you at netsuite.com/twist.